The SHS parking lot smelled like rain and antiseptic and something Mario couldn't name, something sharp and wrong, the way fear has its own scent when it's been living inside your body long enough to become familiar. He didn't run. Running was the one thing Junmo had trained out of him completely. Running makes you look unstable, he used to say, straightening Mario's collar like a man arranging something he owned. And unstable omegas get flagged, baby. You know what happens to flagged omegas. Mario knew. He'd known for 2 years. That knowledge was the cage. So he walked, fast, deliberate, ribs screaming under the hospital bandage wrap, blue shirt damp at the collar where the rain had found him before he found cover. The parking lot was half empty. Lights flickered in the 4th row. He counted cars the way he'd learned to count exits, escape routes, the seconds between a shift in Junmo's voice and what came after. Footsteps behind him. Unhurried. Certain. He never runs either, Mario thought. He never has to. And then, under the one light that wasn't dying, a man. Black suit. Dark hair, swept back. Standing beside a black car like he'd been placed there, like the night had arranged him specifically. Tall. Still. The kind of still that wasn't peace, it was control. The kind of alpha whose scent you felt before you smelled it, pressure first, like weather changing. Mario had 3 seconds to make the worst or best decision of his life. He chose. 4 steps. He closed the distance in 4 steps, grabbed 2 fistfuls of black suit jacket, pressed his face hard against the man's chest, warm, solid, the faint trace of cedar wood and something darker underneath, and said the only words he had left. Please. His voice cracked on it. He hated that. He pressed on anyway. Just pretend you know me. Silence. Not the silence of someone about to push him away. Not the silence of confusion. Something else, something that felt like a held decision. Then the man's arm came around him. Not gentle. Not rough. Precise. Like a door being bolted from the inside. His forearm crossed Mario's chest, his large hand settling against Mario's opposite shoulder, and he turned, just slightly, putting himself between Mario and everything behind him. Mario stopped breathing. Junmo's voice. Closer than he'd calculated. The Korean came out clipped, practiced, the specific register he used when he wanted to sound reasonable in public. Hey. That's my omega. The man holding Mario said nothing. Mario felt it then, the shift. The quality of the silence changed. The chest under his cheek didn't move. The arm across him didn't tighten. But something in the atmosphere of the man rearranged itself, the way the air changes before lightning decides where to land. Junmo's footsteps slowed. Then stopped. When did he stop? Mario thought, disoriented. Junmo never stopped. Junmo didn't stop for anyone. Junmo was a man who'd spent 3 years learning every pressure point in Mario's legal status, his immigration paperwork, his designation file, and he'd never once stopped. He was stopped now. The man holding Mario finally spoke. His voice was low. Quiet the way a minimum is quiet, not because there's nothing there, but because most of it is below what ordinary people can hear. I know him. 3 words. No elaboration. The Korean came out unhurried, each syllable the same weight, like he was confirming a fact as boring as the weather. Mario's hands, still fisted in black suit fabric, slowly unclenched. Behind him, he heard something he had never heard in 2 years. Junmo. Taking 1 step back. The arm across Mario's chest didn't move. Didn't loosen. Didn't claim. It simply stayed, a wall that had chosen, for reasons Mario did not yet understand, to be on his side. Don't cry, he told himself. Don't you dare. The tear that tracked down his cheek did not receive the memo. The man's thumb, just the edge of it, moved once against Mario's shoulder. So small. So deliberate. I see it, that movement said. I won't mention it. My car, the man said quietly, to Mario alone, is this way. He follows. Not because he has no choice, but because, for the first time in 2 years, the body beside him is not counting what he owes. That is the most dangerous thing that has ever happened to Mario. He doesn't know it yet. The SUV was black inside and out, and it smelled like leather and cold air and the faint, controlled scent of an alpha who had learned to suppress. Mario noticed that last part the way he noticed everything now, automatically, defensively, cataloging threat levels the way his biochemistry professors had taught him to catalog compounds. Identify, classify, determine volatility. The man beside him was not volatile. That was somehow worse. Volatile, Mario understood. Volatile had patterns. This man had none that Mario could read, and Mario had spent 2 years becoming very good at reading alphas. No one spoke. There were 2 other men in the vehicle, one driving, one in the passenger seat. Neither had reacted when their employer had walked a crying, rain-damp Omega to the car. No exchanged glances. No adjusted posture. They received this information the way walls receive it. Mario sat rigid against the opposite door, as far from Jin-sook as the back seat allowed, and stared at his own hands in his lap. His knuckles were still white. His ribs pulsed under the bandage wrap with every breath, a steady, humiliating reminder of the evening that had preceded this one, which had itself been a reminder of the month before that. You are in a car, he told himself, with a man whose name you do not know, going somewhere you have not been told. This is objectively worse than what you left. He knew that. He also knew Junmo's footsteps had stopped. He cleared his throat. I need to be dropped somewhere. His voice came out steadier than he deserved. Jim Jilbang. Anyone. I don't need, he stopped. Recalibrated. I don't need anything else. Jin-sook, who had been looking out the opposite window since they pulled out of the hospital lot, turned his head. He looked at Mario the way someone looks at a calculation they're working through, not unkind, not warm, simply attentive in a way that had weight to it. He asked one question. Does he know where you sleep? Mario opened his mouth. Closed it. The Jimjilbang he'd been planning to name, the one in Mapo he'd looked up 3 weeks ago on a night when leaving had still felt like something he might actually do. Junmo had driven past it once, pointed at it, said that's where runaways go, isn't it? And you're not a runaway, are you, baby? You're just tired, come home. Junmo knew every Jimjilbang within 4 kilometers of their apartment. Mario said nothing. Jin-sook faced forward again. That was all. No press, no satisfaction at being right, no cataloging of the silence as a point scored. He simply absorbed the answer Mario hadn't given and returned to looking out the window, as if the matter were now administrative rather than personal. They drove for 19 minutes. Mario counted. The apartment in Mapo was on the 14th floor of a building that had no signage on the outside and a lobby that required a key card Mario wasn't given. Jin-sook used his own. He said nothing in the elevator. The hallway was carpeted and very quiet. Inside, clean lines, gray and white, a kitchen stocked with the specific neutrality of a space that was maintained but not lived in. A bedroom with a made bed. Curtains already drawn. A bathroom with sealed toiletries still in packaging. It was not a home. It was a solution. Jin-sook set a phone on the kitchen counter. Not his own, new, still carrying the faint plasticky smell of the packaging. He looked at Mario once, the same measuring look as before, and said the only thing he said for the rest of the night. Don't call him. Then he left. The door closed. The lock engaged from the outside, and then, 3 seconds later, Mario heard the small mechanical sound of it disengaging again. Left unlocked. The distinction so deliberate it could only have been intentional. You can leave, that sound said. I'm not Junmo. Mario stood in the middle of the kitchen and did not move for a long time. He had spent 2 years in a penthouse apartment with floor-to-ceiling windows and Junmo's name on the lease and every door technically accessible to him, and he had never once felt as free as he did right now in this gray, impersonal, stranger-owned space in Mapo. That realization was so enormous he couldn't look directly at it. He sat on the edge of the bed instead. Still in his damp shirt. Still bandaged. No one came in to check on him. No footsteps in the hall. No notification on the new phone. Nothing. Just a room. Just silence that wasn't waiting for something to go wrong. Mario lay back. He didn't mean to sleep. He was asleep in 4 minutes. He slept for 14 hours. Mario knew this because the phone Jin-sook had left on the counter had a clock, and when he'd lain down it was 1:17 a.m., and when he opened his eyes to gray afternoon light pressing through the curtains it was 3:24 p.m., and the number between those 2 points was so large it felt accusatory. Like evidence of something he hadn't wanted to admit. His body had simply stopped. Released. Like a fist that had been clenched so long the unclenching wasn't relief so much as structural failure. He lay still for a while, cataloging. Ribs, sore, manageable. Shirt, dry now, wrinkled against his skin. The apartment, exactly as he'd left it, which meant no one had come in while he slept, which meant, he stopped that thought before it could become something embarrassing, like gratitude. He got up. Used the sealed toiletries in the bathroom. Found the kitchen, found it stocked with the quiet efficiency of someone who had anticipated needs without being asked to. Instant rice. Doenjang. Eggs. A protein bar with English text on the wrapper. That detail stopped him for exactly 2 seconds before he put it back and closed the cabinet. The front door had a digital keypad. Mario stood in front of it. He pressed the handle. It opened. He stood in the open doorway for a moment, looking at the empty carpeted hallway, the elevator at the far end, the gray sole afternoon visible through the narrow window at the corridor's turn. Everything available. Everything accessible. He stepped back inside and closed the door. He wasn't ready to examine why. Secretary Beck arrived at 4 o'clock with the specific knock of someone who has been trained to signal their presence without demanding a response. 2 measured raps, then stillness, then waiting. Mario opened the door. The man was perhaps 50, slight, with the posture of someone who had spent decades making themselves precisely as visible as a situation required and no more. He carried 2 paper bags and a document folder, and he bowed at an angle that managed to convey both formality and the complete absence of condescension, which in Mario's recent experience was a combination so rare it felt almost suspicious. Mr. Mario. He used the name without preface or explanation, which meant Jinsok had given it. Mario didn't remember giving it. He must have, in the parking lot, those first blurred minutes he was still reconstructing in order. I'm Secretary Beck. I handle Mr. Park's secondary properties. I've brought some things. He did not ask to come in. He waited. Mario stepped aside. Beck set both bags on the kitchen counter with the practiced efficiency of a man who had done this before, not this specifically, perhaps, but the general shape of it, the quiet management of a situation that required no commentary. He unpacked without explaining. Fresh food, a change of clothes still in retail folding, a charger that fit the phone on the counter. The clothes were the right size. Mario looked at them and said nothing. The Wi-Fi password is written inside the folder, Beck said, straightening. There's also the building's entry code. He paused, just briefly, but with intention. For your own use. For your own use. Not in case of emergency. Not if you need to leave. Just, yours, neutrally, the way you hand someone a key to a space they're permitted to occupy on their own terms. Mario had lived with Junmo for 2 years. He had never once been given the code to the building's secondary entrance. Mr. Park won't be visiting this evening, Beck continued. He asked me to let you know. Another pause. He asks nothing in return for that information. It's simply, information. Mario kept his face even. Understood. Beck bowed again, same precise angle, and moved toward the door. Secretary Beck. Mario didn't know he was going to speak until he heard himself. Why did he help me? Last night. Beck considered this with the same neutral attentiveness he'd brought to unpacking the groceries. Then he said, I've worked for Mr. Park for 11 years. In that time I've learned to answer the questions he gives me answers for. A small pause. He didn't give me an answer for that one. He left. Mario stood in the kitchen for a long time after, the retail folded clothes on the counter beside him, the building code sitting in the open folder. He hated, with a specificity that felt uncomfortably close to something else entirely, how much he was noticing. Every deliberate distance. Every door left open. Every single thing that was not Junmo. He waited until the following morning. That was the rational choice, rest, plan, move in daylight when the building's lobby would have foot traffic and Junmo would be at his office, where he kept his carefully constructed image of a reasonable man. Junmo did not make scenes in lobbies. Junmo did not make scenes anywhere that could be witnessed. That was the entire architecture of what he was. Mario knew this. He built his plan around it. He wrote nothing down. Old habit, Junmo had a way of finding written things, but he constructed it precisely in his head the way he constructed lab procedures: sequence, contingency, exit. Take the metro to Mapo station, walk the remaining 6 minutes, use the building code, his code, the one he'd contributed to the lease, the one that was legally as much his as Junmo's, collect 3 things and leave. His laptop. His biochemistry lab notebook, the physical one, 18 months of handwritten compound analysis that existed nowhere else. And his mother's watch. The watch was the one he didn't say out loud, even inside his own head. The watch was the one he'd hidden from himself, buried the urgency of it under the practical items because wanting it felt like a vulnerability he couldn't afford. His mother had left England for Seoul at 24 with almost nothing. She'd worn that watch every day for 30 years. When she died, she left it and her recipes and her particular way of laughing at things that frightened her. Mario had inherited all 3. Junmo had said it was safer in the apartment. Too sentimental to risk losing, baby. You'd be devastated. Mario had believed him. That was the thing he was still working out how to forgive himself for. Not the 2 years, not the bruised ribs, not the designation file weaponized like a leash. The believing. The building entrance code had been changed. Mario stood at the keypad and entered his sequence twice, precisely, confirming it wasn't a misremembering. The panel returned the same flat red denial both times. Around him, the lobby was visible through the glass doors, the front desk attendant he recognized, the elevator bank beyond, the ordinary Tuesday morning of a building he had technically lived in for 22 months. He stood there for 11 seconds. Then he became aware of the man standing 2 storefronts back. He hadn't registered him on the walk from the metro, which meant the surveillance had been good, or Mario had been too focused to notice, both of which were unsettling for different reasons. The man wasn't looking at him directly. He was looking at his phone with the specific quality of someone performing looking at their phone while actually tracking peripheral movement. Mario turned to face him fully. The man met his eyes. Didn't look away. Didn't pretend anymore. Mario felt the anger arrive, clean and sudden, the first uncomplicated emotion he'd had in days. This he knew how to do. This was not grief or gratitude or the destabilizing mathematics of a door left unlocked. This was just fury, and fury was simple. He walked back to Mapo. He said nothing when he entered the apartment. He set his Metro card on the counter, sat at the kitchen table, and stared at the wall with his arms folded and his jaw set until his phone, the one from the counter, lit up with a message from a number he didn't have saved. "I'll have someone collect your things. List what you need." Mario stared at the message for a long time. Then he typed 3 items. He did not include the watch. He stared at the 2-item list. He added the watch. He put the phone face down on the table and went to stand at the window with his back to the room. 2 hours and 14 minutes later, Secretary Beck set a box and a small paper bag on the kitchen counter and left without commentary. The box contained the laptop and the lab notebook. The bag contained the watch. Mario picked it up by the strap, the leather worn soft at the band's inner curve from 30 years of his mother's wrist. The face was unscratched. Junmo had kept it in the same place Mario had left it. The small dish on the bedroom shelf, had perhaps not touched it once. He sat down on the kitchen floor. Not dramatically. There simply came a point where the distance between him and the ground seemed less relevant than it had a moment before, and he sat, back against the cabinet, watch held in both hands, and breathed. Long and slow and deliberate, the way the hospital had taught him, the way his body was still relearning. He didn't hear Jin-sook come in. He became aware of him the way you become aware of a shift in barometric pressure, not a sound exactly, more a change in the quality of the air. He looked up. Jin-sook was sitting in the chair across the room. He hadn't turned on the lights. In the gray early evening dimness he was very still, jacket off for the first time, the sleeves of his dress shirt rolled to the forearms resting on his knees. Looking at Mario without expression. He did not ask what was wrong. He did not ask anything. He simply sat, present, quiet, occupying the room without filling it, and let Mario have the floor and the silence and the watch and whatever the expression on Mario's face was doing that Mario couldn't feel clearly enough to name. After a while, Mario looked back down at the watch. Outside, Soul moved on without them. Neither spoke. Neither needed to. It came on the third day. Mario had been expecting it the way you expect weather when the pressure has been dropping for a week, not with surprise, but with the specific braced quality of someone who has checked the forecast and knows it won't be good and has arranged themselves accordingly. His old number was still active. He hadn't cancelled it, couldn't. The contract was tied to a bank account Junmo had helpfully set up for him when Mario had first arrived and found Korean banking bureaucracy difficult to navigate as a foreign student. "I'll handle it, baby. That's what I'm here for." One of 100 small assistances that had each individually looked like love and collectively looked like a net. The phone buzzed on the kitchen table at 8:47 a.m. Junmo. Mario looked at it through 2 full rings. His ribs had mostly stopped announcing themselves, down from a shout to a low, persistent commentary. The watch was on his wrist. He'd put it on that morning, first time in 8 months. He looked at the screen and thought about not answering and understood immediately that he was going to answer, because 2 years of survival conditioning did not simply stop because you changed your address. If Junmo was calling rather than acting, it meant he was still calculating. You needed to know what an alpha was calculating. That was the rule. That was how you stayed ahead. Mario picked up. "There you are." Junmo's voice arrived warm, easy. The specific register that had taken Mario 4 months to learn was not warmth at all but the performance of it. The difference between a fire and a photograph of one. "I've been worried." "I'm fine," Mario said. "You left the hospital alone. In the rain. With your ribs the way they were." A pause waited with careful concern. "Who were you with, in the parking lot?" "A friend." "I didn't recognize him." "You don't know all my friends." A beat. Junmo absorbed this the way he absorbed all small resistances, without visible reaction, filing it somewhere Mario couldn't see. "Come home and we can talk about it." "I'm not angry." He never is, Mario thought. That's the point. "I'm not coming back, Junmo." The warmth in the voice didn't disappear. It simply underwent a slight adjustment, the way a blade adjusts angle. "Mario. Let's be adults about this. Your scholarship renewal is in 3 weeks. Professor Lim's recommendation goes through my colleague's office. You know that, we talked about it. If there's paperwork that doesn't get signed, he let that sit. I'd hate for your program to be disrupted over a misunderstanding." Mario said nothing. He was standing at the kitchen window, one hand flat on the glass, watching the street below with unfocused eyes. "And then there's your designation registration," Junmo continued, lighter now, almost conversational, the way someone discusses the weather when what they mean is the flood. "An unsupported omega with an unstable flag. The Bureau processes those so slowly, and the interim housing they assign is really not somewhere I'd want you to." "I understand what you're saying. I just want you home safe. You know that." The warmth fully restored, seamless. "Come home. We'll reset. You can cook that thing you made last time, the one with the..." "I'm not coming back." A silence that had a different quality than the others. Then, "Come home, Mario." The way he said it, 3 words, soft, absolute, was the clearest he ever was. It was the only moment Junmo ever stopped performing, when the warmth dropped just long enough to let you see the thing underneath it, the thing that had never once considered that Mario's preferences were data worth collecting. Come home the way someone says you are mine, the way someone says there is no version of this where you leave. Mario became aware of Jin-sook. He didn't know how long he'd been there, standing in the doorway between the hall and the kitchen, jacket on, which meant he'd just arrived, which meant he'd heard most of it. His expression was the usual, unreadable, attentive, still. He was looking at the phone in Mario's hand rather than at Mario's face, and something in the quality of his attention had changed from its default setting into something with more temperature. Mario held his gaze for 1 second. Then he said into the phone, steadily, "Don't call this number again," and ended the call. The kitchen was very quiet. Jin-sook remained in the doorway. He didn't comment on what he'd heard. He didn't offer an expression Mario would have to manage. He crossed to the counter, set down his keys, and then looked at Mario with the same directness he'd used in the parking lot. Not a performance of eye contact, just actual attention, the full weight of it. He asked, "How long has he had access to your designation file?" "Not are you okay?" Not that sounded difficult. Not the shape of concern that was really about the discomfort of the witness rather than the person witnessed. The mechanism. He'd asked about the mechanism. Mario opened his mouth. Closed it. Looked down at the watch on his wrist, his mother's watch, the one Junmo had kept as leverage dressed as safekeeping, and felt something shift in his chest that he didn't have immediate vocabulary for. 14 months, he said. Jin-sook nodded once. He pulled out the chair across the table and sat down. "Tell me what he has." It was not a command. It was the specific grammar of someone clearing space. "I'm here, I'm not leaving, start where you need to start." Mario recognized it distantly, the way you recognize a thing you've read about but never encountered in the original. He sat down across from Jin-sook. And for the first time in 2 years, he told someone the whole shape of it. It started because he needed something to do with his hands. That was the honest version. The version Mario told himself while standing in front of the open refrigerator at 6 p.m., cataloging its contents with the focused attention of a man who was absolutely not thinking about the conversation from 2 days ago, the one where he'd sat across from Jin-sook for 40 minutes and laid out the entire architecture of 14 months of controlled vulnerability, document by document, like a biochemist annotating a failed experiment. Jin-sook had listened without interrupting. Had asked 4 questions, each one precise, each one about structure rather than feeling. Who countersigns that? Which bureau? Is it the same office that handles academic enrollment? And had written nothing down, which meant he was the kind of person who retained information without needing to. When Mario finished, Jin-sook had said okay and stood up and made 2 phone calls in the hallway in a voice too low to decipher, and then come back and said your scholarship renewal won't go through Junmo's colleague's office anymore with the same energy one might use to confirm a weather update. Mario had said how. Jin-sook had said it's been handled. Mario had spent the subsequent 48 hours alternating between profound relief and profound irritation at how easily the thing that had been throttling him for over a year had apparently been resolved with 2 phone calls and whatever it meant to be Jin-sook Park. Hence the cooking. He needed his hands. The pantry was stocked with Korean staples, Beck-sufficient provisioning, but there was also, tucked toward the back, a bottle of Worcestershire sauce and plain flour and a tin of chopped tomatoes that suggested either Beck had anticipated something or Jin-sook had quietly asked for them. Mario didn't examine that possibility too closely. He started with the base his mother had always started with, onions low and slow, coaxed rather than rushed, the kitchen filling with the specific smell of patience. Her recipe didn't have a name. It was just the stew, the one she made when Seoul winters pressed too hard against their apartment windows and she wanted, she said, to smell like home without leaving. She'd built it from whatever the local mart had, Korean vegetables folded into an English framework, the cuisine of someone who had planted herself between 2 worlds and decided to grow something new rather than mourn what she'd left. Mario had learned to cook it by standing beside her. He had never written it down. It lived in his hands. He added the gokyuguru because the pantry had it and because his mother had used it too, toward the end, once her palate had fully made its peace with Seoul. He adjusted the Worcestershire with doenjang the way she taught him, not too much, just enough to remind it where it is. He cut the potatoes the Korean way, which was her way by the end, which was his way always. He was reaching for the second bowl before he'd consciously decided to make enough for 2. He left it on the counter and didn't move it. Jin-sook arrived at 7, as he had the past 2 evenings, no announcement, Secretary Beck's key in the lock, the particular quality of his presence that Mario's nervous system had apparently decided to start registering as known rather than unknown, a reclassification Mario had not authorized. He stopped at the kitchen doorway. Looked at the pot, the 2 bowls, the steam. Said nothing. Mario served without explanation. They sat at the table the way they'd established over the past days, Jin-sook on one side, Mario on the other, a distance that was becoming less about caution and more about the specific charged quality of 2 people who have learned each other's silences. Jin-sook ate. Mario watched him from his peripheral vision and pretended he wasn't. The stew was right. It tasted like the small apartment in Dongdaemun where he'd grown up, his mother's hands, winter, the precise feeling of being between two worlds and loved completely in both. It tasted like something he hadn't let himself have in 2 years because Junmo had preferred restaurants and had described Mario's cooking as charming in the tone of someone describing a child's drawing. Jin-sook set his spoon down. He looked at the bowl for a moment, then looked up, not at Mario exactly, slightly past him, the look of someone retrieving something from a distance. Then, in English, accented, careful, each word placed with the deliberateness of someone working in a language they respect. My mother liked to cook when she was scared too. The kitchen went very still. Mario looked at him. Directly, for perhaps the first time without the buffer of a crisis or a negotiation between them. Just looked. At the sharp line of his jaw carrying something it didn't usually carry. At the way the sentence had arrived not as an offering of comfort but as an act of equivalence. I recognize this. I have seen this before, in someone I. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. The scent hit Mario at the edge of awareness, cedarwood and something beneath it, something that had been carefully suppressed and had, for just this moment, loosened slightly. Warm. Unguarded. Mario looked back down at his bowl. He did not say anything. Neither did Jin-sook. Neither acknowledged what had moved through the room like a change in season. But Mario finished his stew, and the kitchen held them both. An outside soul was doing what it always did, indifferent and enormous. And for the first time since his mother died, the food tasted exactly like it was supposed to. It was Mario who started it. He knew that going in. He'd spent 3 days turning the English sentence over in his head. My mother liked to cook when she was scared too, examining it the way he examined unfamiliar compounds, looking for what it was made of, what it indicated about the larger system it had come from. As a biochemistry student he understood that isolated data points were rarely interesting. What was interesting was the pattern. What a single result implied about the structure underneath. Jin-sook Park was a pattern Mario did not have enough data to read. And not being able to read an alpha in his immediate environment was the kind of variable he'd learned, at significant personal cost, not to leave unexamined. So on the 6th evening, when Jin-sook arrived and they'd finished eating and the table held 2 empty bowls and the particular silence that had become their default, comfortable in a way Mario refused to call comfortable, Mario asked his first careful question. Your father ran the organization before you. It was not technically a question. That was intentional. Questions could be deflected. Statements required engagement of a different kind, confirmation, correction, or the revealing choice to offer neither. Jin-sook looked at him across the table. The evenings had developed a specific quality of light, the kitchen lamp, the window dark behind it, the city reduced to ambient glow. In it, Jin-sook's face carried the same controlled composure as always, but Mario had by now catalogued its variations. This one was the look of a man deciding how much of a door to open. Yes, Jin-sook said. Mario waited. He built it over 30 years. Expanded into 6 districts. A pause. He was very effective. The specific word choice landed with weight. Effective. Not successful, not powerful, not respected. The word you chose when the thing you were describing had achieved its function at a cost you were still accounting for. What kind of man was he? Mario asked. Still careful. Still the grammar of excavation rather than interrogation. Jin-sook was quiet for long enough that Mario thought he might not answer. Then, the kind who believed certain people existed to serve a function. Not people, exactly. Categories. His eyes moved briefly to Mario's wrist. The watch, always the watch now, its presence apparently something Jin-sook had catalogued as Mario had catalogued everything else. Omegas were domestic infrastructure, in his framework. Useful. Maintained. Not consulted. Mario kept his face even. And you inherited his organization. At 26. When he died. Nothing in the delivery indicated how he felt about either fact. I inherited the structure and rebuilt the interior. The outside looks the same. The inside doesn't. Not kind, Mario said. He was quoting nothing Jin-sook had actually said, it was the conclusion he'd drawn from 6 days of observation, and he was offering it back to see if it landed true. But different. Something in Jin-sook's expression shifted. The faint recognition of a man being accurately read who hadn't expected to be. Not kind, he agreed. Kind is a luxury in certain kinds of work. But there are rules. Things my organization does not do. People it does not touch. A beat. Omegas are not handled, traded, leveraged, or used as collateral. That is not negotiable and it is not recent. It was the first thing I changed. Mario absorbed this. Filed it. Felt the edge of the question he actually wanted to ask approaching like a tide he'd been watching from a distance for 6 days. He asked it. Why did you help me? In the parking lot. Jin-sook looked at him steadily. Mario looked back. The kitchen held its breath. Then Jin-sook said, someone did it for someone I couldn't protect. I owed a debt to no one specific. The sentence arrived simply, without performance, and hit Mario somewhere beneath his sternum with a precision that had nothing to do with the words and everything to do with the shape of them. The grammar of it. The way it was constructed around an absence, someone I couldn't protect. The past tense carrying the specific weight of a wound that had closed over without fully healing, the kind that changed the tissue around it permanently. Mario understood this. He understood it not intellectually but in his body. In the same place he understood the watch on his wrist and why he couldn't have left it in Junmo's apartment and survived the leaving. Grief had a language. It wasn't spoken in the wound itself but in the architecture built around it afterward, in what you changed, what you refused, what you did at 1 a.m. in a hospital parking lot for a crying stranger who reminded you of something you couldn't name out loud. He didn't ask who. Jin-sook didn't offer it. Some debts were too private for full translation. Mario of all people understood that. What he said instead, quietly, looking at the table rather than at Jin-sook directly, she would have thought it was enough. Whatever you did, after. She would have thought it counted. A long silence. He didn't know why he'd said she. He hadn't been told it was a she. But Jin-sook didn't correct him, which was its own kind of confirmation. Its own quiet door opened 1 inch further. I'm not sure it does, Jin-sook said. But I keep doing it anyway. Mario looked up. Jin-sook was already looking at him, not with the measuring attentiveness of the past 6 days, but with something quieter underneath it. Something that had no name in the vocabulary either of them was using yet. Neither reached for one. The lamp held its small circle of light. Outside, the city moved on without them, the way cities do, indifferent to the precise moment two people stop being strangers. On the 8th day, Mario left the apartment with his laptop bag and didn't tell anyone. This was, he understood, not an act of rebellion so much as a reclamation. He had been a person who moved through Seoul before Junmo had systematically reduced his radius, first subtly, the way you adjust a dial rather than throw a switch, until one day Mario had looked up and realized his entire world had contracted to a penthouse apartment, a university campus he only visited when Junmo approved the schedule, and the narrow corridor between them. He took the metro to Sinchon. Walked to the university library. Badged in with a student card that still worked, which meant his enrollment hadn't been touched. Jin-sook's phone calls, presumably, their effects quiet and structural and invisible the way all the most significant changes were. He found a desk in the back corner of the 3rd floor, the one beside the window that looked out over the ginkgo trees, the one he'd used in his first year before Junmo had begun requiring him home by 6. He opened his laptop. He opened his lab notes. He worked for 4 hours without interruption and it felt like drinking water after a long thirst, ordinary and necessary and almost painful in its relief. He noticed the man on the way out. Dark jacket, phone in hand, standing at the base of the library steps with the specific quality of stillness Mario had by now learned to recognize as professional rather than natural. The man didn't look at him directly. Didn't need to. Mario clocked the earpiece at 30 meters and kept walking. He stopped at a convenience store on the way to the metro. Bought triangle kimbap and a canned coffee and ate standing at the window counter, watching the street. A black car was parked across the road at an angle that provided clear sightlines to the store entrance. It had been there when he arrived. He hadn't noticed it arriving. He finished his kimbap. Bought a second canned coffee and didn't taste it. He went to the Han River the following evening. Sat on the bank at Uedo as the light went amber and then grey, the water doing its usual indifferent thing, broad and slow and unbothered by the city stacked up on either side of it. He'd come here in his first months in Seoul, before Junmo, when the city had still been something he was learning rather than something he was navigating. He'd sit and eat cheap tteokbokki from the pojangmeka and feel the specific freedom of being nobody in a city that didn't know his name. The man tonight was better than the library one. Mario only identified him because he'd been looking, deliberately, methodically, the way you run a scan when you know there's something to find. He was seated 2 benches back, reading. The book was real, Mario could see the spine. But he turned a page every 4 minutes regardless of its length, which was either very slow reading or very good tradecraft. Mario counted 4 separate instances over 6 days. Library, convenience store, Han River, campus pharmacy. Each time, present, distant, unobtrusive, consistent. He was not being followed. He was being covered. The distinction had seemed academic until he'd started feeling it, and now it felt enormous and infuriating, and something else underneath the infuriating that he refused to examine in any kind of light. He confronted Jin-sook that evening. Not in the way Junmo had trained him to expect confrontations, carefully, apologetically, preemptively softening the edges of his own position. He walked in, set his bag on the counter, and said, "I didn't ask to be watched." Jin-sook was at the kitchen table with a document he closed without hurry. He looked at Mario with the full attentiveness that Mario had stopped flinching at sometime around day 4. "No," he agreed. "You didn't." "I don't need," Mario stopped. Recalibrated. He was not going to use Junmo's vocabulary, the framework of needing and not needing as moral positions, the way Junmo had made every form of need into a debt. "I'm not asking for protection. I didn't sign up for surveillance." "It's not surveillance." There was a man at the library. A car outside the convenience store in Sinchon. Someone at the Han River last night reading the same page for 20 minutes. Jin-sook absorbed this without visible reaction, which meant he was neither surprised by the coverage nor by the fact that Mario had mapped it precisely. "You were thorough," he said, with something in his tone that wasn't quite approval and wasn't quite amusement but occupied the narrow space between them. "Don't do that," Mario said. "Don't make it a compliment. I'm telling you to call them off." Jin-sook looked at him steadily. The kitchen held the particular silence of a room waiting to hear what came next. Then he said, "You asked me to pretend. In the parking lot." His voice was even, unhurried. "I'm still pretending." Mario opened his mouth. Nothing came out. He replayed the parking lot, the 4 steps, the grabbed lapel, the whispered plea. "Please. Just pretend you know me." And Jin-sook's "I'm coming" around him, the voice like low thunder. "There you are, I've been waiting." The performance of a man who knew this person, claimed this person, stood between this person and the thing pursuing him. He was still performing it. That was what he was saying. The watch retrieved, the scholarship untouched, the quiet men 2 storefronts back, all of it the extended grammar of that 2-minute scene in the parking lot, Jin-sook still holding the shape of the lie Mario had asked him to tell. The anger didn't leave. But it became complicated, which was worse. "That's not," Mario started. "You're right that you didn't ask," Jin-sook said. Quietly, without apology but also without defense. "If you want me to stop, I'll stop. Tell me clearly and it's done." The out was genuine. Mario could feel it, no edge beneath it, no conditional, no "but what will you do without me" folded inside the offer. Just a door, the same way all of Jin-sook's doors operated, open, unforced, the choice returned to Mario completely. Mario stood in the middle of the kitchen and said nothing for a long moment. The man at the Han River had turned his page every 4 minutes. The car in Sinchon had been parked at the exact angle that covered the store entrance and the street in both directions. Nobody had approached him, spoken to him, made themselves known or created any impression of being owed anything for their presence. He was not caged. He was, the word arrived and he stood still under its weight, kept. In the older sense of it, the one that had nothing to do with captivity. The one that meant looked after. Attended to from a distance, by someone who asked nothing back. He had never in his adult life been kept like that. I want to know, Mario said finally, his voice coming out somewhere between the anger and the thing underneath it. When they're there. I want to know in advance, not discover it and have to map it myself. If you're going to do this, I want the information. I don't want to be managed. Jin-sook held his gaze. Then nodded, once. Okay. That's all I'm saying. Okay, Jin-sook said again, the same way, no elaboration, no expansion, the word doing exactly the work it needed to and nothing more. Mario picked up his bag from the counter. Went to his room. Closed the door with a measured click that was not a slam, which cost him more than he expected. He sat on the edge of the bed and pressed the heels of his hands against his eyes and thought about the parking lot, and the arm across his chest, and a man who had apparently decided that pretending meant something larger than Mario had understood when he'd asked for it. He had no answer for that. He suspected that was the point. He did it on a Tuesday, which felt right. Tuesdays had no emotional weight. Tuesdays were administrative, functional, the day of the week least likely to be remembered as significant, and Mario had spent enough time in a relationship that theatricalized everything, that turned every ordinary moment into a stage for Junmo's narrative, that he had developed a strong preference for doing important things quietly, on unremarkable days, without an audience. He re-enrolled on Tuesday morning from the library's third floor, the corner desk by the Ginkgo window. The university's Omega Student Services portal had a new case officer assigned to his file. He didn't know how, and he'd stopped being surprised by the how of things that had Jin-sook's fingerprints on them, invisible and structural the way all the most significant changes were. The new officer processed his reinstatement in 40 minutes and sent a confirmation email with the flat efficiency of university administration, which Mario found deeply comforting. No drama. Just a student returning to his program. Just paperwork, processed. The Omega certified housing application took longer, 2 hours, 3 uploaded documents, a form that required a counter-signature from the university's designation welfare office, which the new case officer provided within the same morning. The housing itself was in a postgraduate block 10 minutes from the biochemistry building. Small, functional, Omega registered under the university's independent sponsorship program, which meant no alpha cosigner, no bond partner requirement, no Junmo. Just Mario's name. On a lease. That was his. He sat with the confirmation email open on his screen and breathed through it for a moment. The specific feeling of a door reopening that you'd watched close so gradually you hadn't noticed it was shut until you were standing in the dark. Then he closed the laptop and went back to Mapo. Jin-sook was in by the time Mario arrived, jacket on, which meant he'd just come from somewhere or was about to go somewhere. He always removed the jacket within the first 10 minutes, Mario had observed, as if the apartment occupied a different register than wherever he'd been. He was standing at the kitchen counter with a glass of water and the particular quality of stillness that was his default state, and he looked up when Mario came in with the unhurried attention that Mario had entirely stopped experiencing as threatening and had begun experiencing as something he didn't have a clean word for. Mario set his bag down. Stayed standing. I've re-enrolled in my biochemistry program, he said. Second semester starts in 3 weeks. I've arranged University Omega certified housing, independent sponsorship, through the institution. I move in on Friday. He paused. I'm telling you, not asking. The last sentence was not aggression. It was precision, the careful placement of a boundary that was also, underneath, an acknowledgement. I'm telling you because you are someone it is appropriate to tell. Not because I require your permission. Because you are, something. In this. And I am not pretending otherwise even though naming it is still beyond my current vocabulary. Jin-sook looked at him for a long moment. The kitchen held its breath. Then he said, good. Just that. The single word arrived without qualification, without the performance of supportiveness, without the particular inflation that would have made it feel like a reward being granted. Just, good, the way you confirm a calculation that has come out correctly. Clean, even, final. Mario had prepared himself, in the walk back from the library, for several possible responses. He had not prepared himself for the one that treated his autonomy as the obvious expected outcome rather than a concession being graciously made. He was still calibrating when Jin-sook set his water glass down and said, carefully, the specific carefulness of someone handling something they understand to be fragile, not because it is weak but because it is precise, because the wrong pressure in the wrong place will change its structure permanently. Is there anything you need that I can help with? That you would actually let me? Mario went very still. He replayed the sentence. Paused it. Found the architecture of it. Not let me help you, which placed the help as Jinsook's to give and Mario's to receive, which made Mario the object of the sentence. Not you need me or you'll need help or any of the dozen grammatical constructions that would have centered Jinsook's role, Jinsook's offering, the debt being accumulated in the giving. Is there anything you need? That you would actually let me. The you was the subject throughout. What Mario needed. What Mario would permit. Jinsook inserted into the sentence only as a conditional, a resource available if elected, dependent entirely on Mario's governance of the situation. It was the most intimate thing anyone had ever said to him. Not because it was tender, it wasn't, particularly, delivered in the same even register Jinsook used for everything. But because it understood him. Because it had looked at who Mario actually was, the man who'd attempted to return to Junmo's apartment alone rather than ask, who'd confronted the surveillance with irritation rather than gratitude, who'd re-enrolled and rehoused himself in a single Tuesday morning without consulting anyone, and it had built its offer in exactly the shape that person could receive. A door. Sized correctly. Hinged on Mario's side. Mario looked at him across the kitchen. He thought about saying no thank you, which was habit and armor and the sentence his body reached for automatically. He thought about saying yes to something specific, the lab equipment deposit perhaps, or the case officer contact, something transactional that could be accepted without changing the weight distribution between them. He said neither. I'll think about it, he said. Jinsook nodded. Okay. No follow-up. No timeline requested. The offer logged and left exactly where he'd placed it, a door, open, patient, asking nothing about when or whether Mario walked through it. Mario moved through the next 3 days with the surface efficiency of a man with logistics to manage, packing the few things Beck had brought, confirming the Friday housing handover, reviewing his re-enrollment module schedule, responding to a tentative email from his lab supervisor with the careful professionalism of someone re-entering a space they'd been absent from. Underneath all of it, without interruption, he thought about nothing else. He thought about it at 2 a.m. when the apartment was quiet and Seoul was doing its ambient nighttime thing beyond the curtains. He thought about it in the shower, pausing the sentence again with the involuntary focus of his biochemistry brain applying itself to a structure it couldn't fully classify. He thought about it on his Thursday evening walk along the Han River, alone. He'd been told in advance that evening that no one would be covering the route, Jinsook honoring Tuesday's negotiation with the same quiet consistency he honored everything, watching the water do its broad indifferent thing and feeling, for the first time in longer than he could accurately calculate, like a person whose inner life was his own again. Is there anything you need? That you would actually let me? The question wasn't about logistics, he'd understood by Thursday. It wasn't about the housing deposit or the lab equipment or any specific, transactional thing. It was a question about whether Mario had found, after everything, any capacity left to let someone in. Not all the way. Not without terms. Just, in. One door's width. On his own conditions. It was asking, are you still capable of that? And Mario, standing at the Han River on a Thursday evening with his mother's watch on his wrist and his enrollment confirmed and his new lease signed in Junmo reduced to a legal matter currently being handled by people whose names he didn't need to know, found that he didn't yet know the answer. But for the first time, he was asking himself the question without already knowing it was no. That felt, cautiously, like something. The detention order arrived on a Wednesday. Of course it did. Mario had been wrong about Tuesdays being the unremarkable day. It turned out Wednesdays were the day the universe selected for structural collapse, the day things that had been holding arrived at their terminal load and gave. It came as a physical document, which was deliberately archaic. Junmo would have known that digital notifications could be screenshot, time-stamped, immediately forwarded to a lawyer within seconds of receipt. Paper required presence. Paper meant someone had to be at the address. Paper meant Junmo had known his new university housing address, which meant he'd had someone watching, which meant the coverage Mario had agreed to with Jin-sook and the absence of it on his Thursday Han River walk and every subsequent independent movement had been observed, catalogued, used. Mario stood in the doorway of his small postgraduate housing unit, the document in both hands, and read it twice with the focused attention of a man who had learned that panic was most efficiently processed by first understanding precisely what you were panicking about. Omega Welfare Complaint, filed under Article 34(b) of the Designation Welfare Act. Complainant, Cho Junmo, Registered Alpha Sponsor. Basis, alleged unstable designation status, unsupported habitation, potential risk of self-harm or exploitation. Interim detention order, 48 hours, pending welfare assessment. Reporting location, Seoul Omega Designation Processing Center, Yeongdeungpo. Compliance required within 6 hours of receipt. 6 hours. It was 9:14 a.m. He called the lawyer first. The one he'd researched 3 weeks ago, an Omega rights specialist in Mapo, sharp reviewed, fast responding, recommended on 3 separate forums Mario had quietly bookmarked in the first weeks of planning to leave. The lawyer answered on the second ring, listened without interrupting while Mario read the document aloud, and said, "Don't go voluntarily. Don't go at all until I've reviewed the filing. Give me 40 minutes. Mario gave her 40 minutes. He used them to photograph every page of the document, timestamp the images, email them to himself and to the lawyer, write a sequential log of the morning beginning from the moment of receipt, and pull up the Omega Designation Welfare Act on his laptop to read Article 34(b) in full, which was what Junmo had filed under, so that he understood the mechanism rather than just the outcome. He did not call Jin-sook. He was aware of not calling Jin-sook with the same constant low-frequency awareness of a thing you are deliberately not doing. You feel its shape by its absence, the way you feel a word you're choosing not to say. He had the number. The phone from the Mapo apartment was still in his bag. He'd kept it without examining why. He did not use it. This was his. Junmo had filed against him, had attempted to use the legal apparatus of an Omega-verse world to fold him back into compliance, and Mario was going to meet that with his own resources, his own lawyer, his own documented timeline. He was not going to be a person who reached for Jin-sook Park every time the ground moved. He had been someone's dependent for 2 years. He knew what that cost. The lawyer called back at 10:02 and said, "The filing has procedural problems. Junmo listed himself as your registered alpha sponsor, which requires a current bond registration certificate. If that registration has been administratively modified in the past 30 days. It has, Mario said. He didn't know the specifics, but he was certain of the fact. One of Jin-sook's phone calls, presumably, in the first week, something handled quietly that Mario hadn't asked about because he'd been overwhelmed and then had filed under structural changes, Jin-sook's doing, examine later. Then the complaint foundation is invalid and we can challenge the detention order on filing grounds. But that takes time the order doesn't give you. You have, a pause, paper sounds, 4 hours and 30 minutes before mandatory compliance. If you don't report, they can escalate to a compulsory collection order, which is worse. Another pause. Do you have any alpha of significant registered status who could invoke a temporary guardian designation? It's rarely used, most people don't know it exists, but it would supersede the detention order immediately and give us time to demolish the complaint through proper channels. Mario was quiet for 3 seconds. "I'll call you back," he said. He didn't call. He sent a message, 2 sentences, deliberate in their plainness. Junmo filed an Omega welfare complaint. Detention order, 4 hours. I have a lawyer. I'm handling it. He added, after a pause that cost him something he didn't quantify. My lawyer mentioned temporary guardian designation. He put the phone down and went to make tea because his hands needed something to do. The reply came in 40 seconds. Not a message. Jin-sook called. Mario answered. Where are you? Not a question. The same register as the parking lot, the administrative calm of someone already moving. University housing. I told you, I have a. I know you have a lawyer. I'm not replacing her. A brief pause. I'm going to invoke temporary guardian. It requires your verbal consent. I need you to say yes. Mario stood in his small kitchen, tea unmade, one hand on the counter. Outside his window, the university campus was doing its ordinary Wednesday morning. Students crossing the quad, ginkgo trees, the biochemistry building's familiar roofline visible from this angle. His life resumed. His program, his desk, his lab notebook, his name on a lease that was only his. "This doesn't change anything," Mario said. "Between us. It's not a claim." "I know," Jin-sook said. "That's why it's temporary guardian and not bond partner. It's a legal instrument. It expires. It means nothing except that you're protected until your lawyer finishes dismantling the complaint." Mario closed his eyes briefly. Opened them. Looked at the campus outside. "Yes," he said. The Omega Designation Processing Center in Yeongjungpo was a government building of the particularly soul-flattening variety, fluorescent lighting, institutional gray, the specific atmosphere of a place designed to process people rather than see them. Mario arrived with his lawyer at 1:30 p.m. and spent 90 minutes in a waiting area that smelled like recycled air and bureaucratic indifference while his lawyer worked through channels Mario couldn't fully follow, her voice low and precise through the glass partition of the consultation room. At 3:07 p.m., a processing officer appeared and said, with the flattened effect of someone delivering routine information, "Detention order has been suspended pending temporary guardian registration. You're released to your guardian's custody pending complaint resolution." Custody was the word Mario had known would be in there somewhere, the legal language that couldn't be avoided even when the substance wasn't what the language implied. He picked up his bag. Followed the officer to the corridor. Jin-sook was standing there. No Secretary Beck. No men positioned at angles. No black SUV visible through the lobby glass. Just Jin-sook, in his suit, hands at his sides, watching Mario come through the processing door with the same full attention he brought to everything. Mario stopped 2 meters from him. The corridor was empty except for them and the retreating footsteps of the processing officer. "I'm furious with you," Mario said. "I know," Jin-sook said. The simplicity of it, no defense, no "but I helped you," no inflation of the rescue into something Mario owed, landed with the same precise weight as everything else Jin-sook said. He knew. He wasn't asking Mario not to be. "I didn't ask you to," Mario said. "No," Jin-sook said. "You didn't. I chose to." The fluorescent light hummed above them. Somewhere down the corridor a door opened and closed. Mario stood in the space between those two statements and felt the full architecture of them. "You didn't ask, I chose," and the distinction it was drawing, the one he'd been turning over since the parking lot, since the arm across his chest, since every door left open and every offer made in the grammar of "if you want" rather than "because you need." The silence stretched. "Is there a difference?" Mario asked. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Jin-sook looked at him steadily. "Yes," he said. "Everything." Mario held his gaze for a long moment. Then he looked down, not away, just down, processing. His mother's watch caught the fluorescent light on its face. "Someone did it for someone I couldn't protect. I owed a debt to no one specific." He understood it now in the way you understand things that have been true all along but required the right angle of light. Jin-sook hadn't helped him because Mario was an Omega in distress. Hadn't helped him because the debt required an Omega specifically. Had helped him because Mario had grabbed his lapels in a hospital parking lot with tears on his face and pride still burning in his jaw, and something in that combination had landed. Had found whatever Jin-sook kept beneath the controlled composure and the criminal empire and the suit and the carefully rebuilt interior of an organization inherited from a man who believed Omegas were furniture. Had found the place that was still grieving. And recognized it. "I chose to." 2 people choosing. That was the difference. That was everything. 3 weeks later, the Omega welfare complaint was formally dismissed, procedural invalidity upheld, Junmo's bond registration fraud referred to a separate legal process, his access to Mario's designation file permanently revoked by order of the Bureau. His connections to the University Scholarship Office had, quietly, ceased to function sometime in the preceding month. He did not call again. Mario was in the biochemistry lab on a Thursday afternoon when his supervisor stopped by his bench to say his proposal for the spring research series had been approved, full funding, which was the kind of news that in another life Mario would have carried home to tell someone. He looked at the approval letter for a moment and felt the particular texture of good news received alone, clean, and also slightly unfinished. He was outside by 6, bag over one shoulder, moving through the campus evening, ginkgo trees, the quadrangle lit gold, students dispersing in the ordinary unhurried way of people whose lives were not in crisis and who therefore had the luxury of moving slowly. Jin Sook was at the edge of the quad. No men. No car at the curb. No suit, a dark coat over a plain shirt, collar open, hands in his pockets, standing with the same quality of stillness as always except that without the infrastructure of his professional life arranged around him he looked different. Present in a way that the suit slightly obscured. Simply a person, standing in the evening light of a university campus, waiting. Mario stopped in front of him. Looked at him. "You could have asked," Mario said. "To come. To be here. To do any of it." "I'm asking now," Jin Sook said. His eyes were steady, the same full attention, and underneath it, not hidden, just quiet, available for the first time without the professional distance holding it in place, something that had been there since a parking lot and a plea and an arm across a chest that did not squeeze. "Can I take you somewhere?" Mario looked at him for a long moment. Then he picked up his bag more firmly on his shoulder, and said, "I'll decide when we get there." He walked forward. Past Jin Sook, toward the campus gate, into the sole evening, ginkgo gold and wide and entirely, finally, his. Jin Sook followed. It was the first time Mario had ever led. And this time, he didn't count the steps.